It was 3:08 in the morning when my phone rang. At that hour, calls don't bring hope, they bring news. You spend a lifetime trying not to imagine. But this one said the opposite. Mr. Hale, your daughter is alive. She's asking for you. For a second, my breath simply didn't return. My chest locked like I'd stepped into freezing water. Because my daughter, Emily Hale, was buried in a cemetery outside Denver 31 years ago. I put the dirt on her coffin with my own hands. I watched the ground close over her. I believed, God help me. I believed she was gone. If you're new here, check you're subscribed, because you're going to need the whole story to believe what happened next. I muttered into the dark, not sure if I was talking to myself or to the empty room. The woman on the line introduced herself as a psychiatric nurse from St. Mercer Hospital in Portland. She said a patient had walked in 2 days earlier, confused, exhausted, barely standing, carrying nothing but a backpack and a name she wasn't sure belonged to her. She described a birthmark, the nurse said softly, a half moon on the right shoulder blade. She called it her lucky crescent. She said her father used to tell her it would glow when she was brave. No one alive should know about that. We never put it in the missing report. We never told the press. It was something only our family knew. Something from a bedtime story I made up when Emily was small and afraid of thunderstorms. And then the nurse said, she remembers the treehouse, Mr. Hale. The one you built, even though you're terrified of heights. I sat on the edge of my bed, both hands over my mouth, and the room spun slowly like the world had tilted off its axis. Because the one thing I've never been able to outrun was the sound of her asking me, when she was 7, Dad, will you climb up with me? And how I forced myself to climb that ladder though my legs shook so badly she giggled all the way up. I stood up before I knew what I was doing. I grabbed pants, pulled on the first jacket I found, and by 3:20, I was in my truck heading west toward Portland. 4 states in the dark, 4 hours of highway light reflecting off wet pavement, mountains rising like shadows. And all I could hear was her voice from decades ago. Dad, can you see me from down there? The road stretched ahead like a tunnel. I kept the radio off. Silence felt safer, even when it scared me. I'm 62 now. My hands aren't as steady as they used to be. I work part-time at a small garage in Colorado Springs, just enough to pay the bills after retirement savings got tight. My wife, God rest her, passed 12 years after Emily vanished. Some people die from illness, some from old age, some from heartbreak so slow, no doctor can name it. Since then, I've lived mostly alone. A modest, rented house. A few tools. A garden that grows better than I do. And a quiet routine that feels more like waiting than living. My son, Mark, calls every few weeks. He's kind, but the distance between us isn't measured by miles. He was 11 when Emily disappeared. He still carries that silence. I've lived 31 years inside a memory I never wanted. A memory of a December night when a 17-year-old girl should have come home from school, but didn't. A memory of a phone call from the police. A memory of a funeral without a body, a coffin too light, and a life that cracked down the center. But tonight, this morning, that memory flickered. For the first time in decades, something inside me dared to move. Not hope, more like a tremor under the earth, warning that something buried deep was shifting. Halfway to Portland, I pulled over near a gas station just off the interstate because my hands were shaking too badly to hold the wheel steady. Rain hammered the windshield. My breath fogged the glass. And I remembered something I hadn't let myself think about in years. 2 months ago, while filing paperwork for my retirement fund, the financial officer mentioned a detail that didn't make sense. Someone attempted to open a guardianship account under your daughter's name in 1994, a year after she allegedly died. I dismissed it as clerical error. Now it returned like a cold hand on the back of my neck. Who would file that? For what purpose? And if someone had been using Emily's name, what else had they taken? I started driving again, and the sky slowly lightened from charcoal to bruised blue as Portland loomed ahead, bridges cutting across the Willamette River, streetlights glimmering like small lanterns in the dawn. I reached St. Mercer Hospital just after sunrise. The building rose gray and tall, all steel and glass, the kind of place where stories collide, births, endings, and everything in between. The parking lot was half empty. The air smelled like rain-soaked asphalt. I sat in my truck for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, trying to gather myself. My heart thudded like I'd run here barefoot. What would I do if she wasn't Emily? What would I do if she was? I stepped out, locked the truck, and walked toward the entrance. Automatic doors slid open with a sigh, as if the building itself exhaled at my arrival. The receptionist looked up. "Can I help you, sir? I'm here for the patient who came in under the name Rachel Moore." Nurse Carver called me. The receptionist's expression softened. "Third floor. Psychiatric unit. She's expecting you." Expecting me. My pulse kicked at my ribs. I climbed the stairs instead of taking the elevator. I needed the movement. Needed something for my hands to do. Each step felt heavier than the last. At the top, a hallway stretched long and quiet. The polished floor reflecting pale morning light. The scent of disinfectant, mixed with faint lavender, the hospital's attempt at comfort. I walked until I reached the glass door marked Psychiatric Care Level A. My reflection stared back at me. Older, thinner, wearing the same jacket I had on the night we learned Emily was gone. I lifted my hand toward the door handle and paused, breath trapped in my chest. Because, in my pocket sat an envelope I hadn't opened in years. Something the police mailed me after closing the case. Inside was a photocopy of a letter allegedly written by Emily in 1994. The handwriting always bothered me. It looked like hers, but too perfect, too rehearsed, too alive. And suddenly, I knew. Whatever waited on the other side of this door. This wasn't only about finding out if Emily was still living. This was about discovering who had decided she was dead, and why they needed her to stay that way. I pushed the door open. The nurse waiting on the other side of the glass door had a calm face, the kind people develop after spending years softening the edges of bad news. "You must be Mr. Hale," she said. "I'm Nurse Carver." She's awake. She's nervous. "But she asked for you." My throat tightened. I nodded, because speech felt like something I used to know how to do, not something I was capable of in that moment. Carver led me down a short hallway lined with doors, each with a small window reinforced by a metal grid. Some rooms were silent. Others held faint murmurs, soft humming. Someone crying quietly behind a closed curtain. A place full of people trying to come back to themselves. "She has moments of clarity," Carver said as we walked. "And moments where memory hits her too hard. Be gentle. She's been lost in someone else's life for a long time." We stopped at a door near the end. Carver gave me a small, encouraging nod. And then, she opened it. The woman sitting by the window was thinner than the Emily in my memories. Her hair, once light brown and sun-warmed, now hung darker, threaded with premature gray. She wore a soft hospital sweater, sleeves pulled over trembling hands. The morning light caught her profile just enough for me to see the slope of her cheekbone, and something inside my chest cracked open. She looked up. Her eyes, God. Those eyes, gray with flecks of blue. The exact shade I'd watched blink up at me from a treehouse floorboard when she was 7. Eyes I'd memorized. Eyes I thought I'd buried. Her breath hitched. "Dad?" My knees nearly gave out. Not because the word was perfect, but because she said it like a person stepping onto fragile ice, not sure if it would hold. I took one step forward, then another, close enough to see the tiny scar near her eyebrow, the one she got from falling off her bike in our old driveway. I hadn't thought about that scar in years. She shouldn't remember it either, unless she really was Emily. "I don't remember everything," she whispered. "But I remember you running beside me that day, telling me not to worry, telling me the world wouldn't let me fall." My hands shook as I reached for the chair across from her. I sat, because standing felt impossible. "Emily," I said. I hadn't heard myself say her name in decades. It scraped out of my chest like something fossilized. "How did you get here?" She closed her eyes, and for a moment, her whole body shuddered, like memory itself was something physical, trying to break through her ribs. "I walked into a shelter 2 nights ago," she said. "I told them I didn't know who I was. I just knew I wasn't Rachel. That name feels like fabric someone wrapped around me too tight. When I saw the missing poster online, something snapped. I told them my name was Emily Hale. I told them I had a father who smelled like pine resin after working in the yard. And then everything hurt. Everything came back too fast. She lifted the sleeve of her sweater and exposed her shoulder. A mark. A pale crescent. The birthmark she'd been born with. My breath left me in one sharp exhale. It wasn't proof. Not alone. But it was more than memory could invent. I kept something, she said suddenly, fumbling in the pocket of her sweater. She pulled out a small square object wrapped in clear plastic. A library card, sun-faded. The kind issued in the early 90s. The name scribbled in the corner. E. Hale. I didn't realize I was crying until I saw a drop land on the plastic. "Where did you get this?" I whispered. She swallowed hard. "From the woman who took me. She kept it. She said I didn't need it, but couldn't let it go. She said it was proof that I used to belong somewhere else." Something sharp twisted in my chest. "Do you remember her?" "Pieces," she said. "A house with boarded windows. A truck with a broken headlight. The smell of gasoline on someone's jacket. A man watching from a porch near the Denver Ridge Mines." The Denver Ridge Mines. A place with its own shadows and stories. The kind of place where people disappeared, and no one asked why. Carver stepped inside, her face pale. "Mr. Hale, there's something else you should know." She handed me a thin folder. Inside was a photocopy of a document. A guardianship application filed in 1994. Filed under a forged signature, Emily's name. Written in the exact curve of her teenage handwriting. My stomach dropped. "Someone kept control of her identity," Carver said quietly. "For years." Emily wrapped her arms around herself, as though bracing against a cold only she could feel. "They kept moving me," she whispered. "New names. New places. I thought it was normal, because I didn't know anything else. Sometimes I remembered flashes of a treehouse, or cinnamon rolls on a Saturday morning. But then it would all fade again." Her gaze lifted to mine. "I don't know who I was for most of those years. But I know you. I know you even when the world feels wrong." I couldn't speak. If I did, the grief lodged inside me for 3 decades would burst out and drown both of us. The door opened again, and Detective Ann Briggs stepped inside. Tall, steady, eyes sharp but kind. "Mr. Hale, I'm reopening your daughter's case. There are documents, reports, things that don't add up, but I need you to hear this." She placed 2 photographs on the table. One showed a pickup truck with a broken left headlight. The other, grainy, taken at night, showed a blurred figure leading a girl toward the passenger side. Emily gasped softly. "That's the truck. I remember that headlight. It flickered." Briggs nodded, her voice low. "This image was pulled from a VHS tape, recorded near the old mining road. Year 1994. The original disappeared from the case file decades ago." My hands shook as I reached for the photo. Everything inside me felt like it was shattering. Someone had known. Someone had hidden the truth. Someone had kept my daughter alive, but stolen her life. "Mr. Hale," Briggs said quietly, "this wasn't a single tragedy. This was a system. And someone profited from keeping Emily gone." Emily's fingers found mine. Her grip was fragile, but real. And in that moment, something inside me hardened. Not hope. Not yet. But a resolve sharp enough to cut through 31 years of silence. Detective Briggs led us to a small conference room down the hall. One of those hospital spaces built for conversations nobody ever wants to have. The walls were pale, the lights too bright, the table too clean. Emily sat beside me, shoulders hunched as though every sound in the corridor might shatter her nerves. I kept my hand near hers, not touching unless she reached for it, letting her choose the distance. Briggs placed a thin stack of documents in front of us. "These were buried in the archives," she said. "I don't know how they got there, but they weren't in the original case file from 93. Someone removed them." My heart hammered. "Show me." She spread out 4 items. A missing witness statement, a transportation log from a youth facility in Idaho, a photocopy of a forged signature, and a short list of names, every one of them struck through in pen, except one. The first document caught my eye immediately. A statement from Wallace Dunn, dated March 1994. The name tugged something loose inside me. I remembered the man vaguely. He lived near the Denver Ridge Mines, worked odd jobs, kept mostly to himself. He smoked cheap cigars and wore old denim jackets, even in summer. What does Dunn have to do with my daughter? I asked quietly. Briggs tapped the statement. He reported seeing a teenage girl escorted into a truck around the same time Emily disappeared. He said the headlight was broken, and the driver kept checking the rearview mirror. Dunn believed she wasn't entering willingly. Emily's breath hitched beside me. I saw him once, she whispered. A man with a denim jacket. He looked at me like he wanted to help but didn't know how. A chill crawled up my spine. Why wasn't this followed up? Briggs exhaled through her nose, frustration tightening her voice. The statement was marked, "Not credible," and removed. No explanation. No follow-up. She hesitated. And Dunn vanished a year later. His cabin was found empty. Something dark pressed against my ribs: anger, grief, the realization that someone had known enough to stay silent, or been silenced. The second document was a transport log from a youth facility in Idaho. It listed Rachel Moore, age 19, transferred in April 1995. Next to it, in faded ink, was a note. No ID. Except temporary guardianship papers. Emily stared at the page as though it might burn her fingers. I remember snow, she whispered. A long drive. Someone humming a song they didn't know the words to. I didn't know who Rachel was. They told me it was my name, but it wasn't mine. It didn't fit. I clenched my jaw. Someone moved her across state lines using forged documents. Someone kept her hidden. Briggs nodded. Not just hidden, controlled. Whoever filed these guardianship forms needed Emily to be legally untraceable. The forged signature is almost perfect. She slid the photocopy toward me. My stomach lurched. The handwriting. It looked exactly like hers when she was 17. Loops, angles, the way she dotted the I with a slight upward flick. I taught her that flick when she was learning cursive. After she complained her dots looked like fly specks. How could anyone replicate something so personal? It's too exact, I murmured. Nobody can forge the habits of a child's hand. Unless they had samples. Briggs finished for me. Emily's hands trembled. They had my school notebooks, she said quietly. I remember pages being taken. Someone said, "We'll use these later." I didn't know what they meant. I felt sick. The third document was a short list of names, handwritten on lined paper. 3 names were crossed out. The fourth, Joyce Hale, was not. A coldness spread across my skin. Not ice. Something heavier. A dread I hadn't felt since the funeral. My sister-in-law. Why is her name there? I asked, voice stiff. Briggs folded her arms. That's what we're trying to understand. She served as the emergency contact when your wife was hospitalized years later. She also handled some of the paperwork regarding Emily's memorial fund. No, I whispered. Joyce helped with the funeral because my wife was barely functioning. She wanted to be useful. That was all. But the doubt crept in anyway, quiet and steady. Emily's voice broke through the silence, thin as thread. Dad, who is she? My wife's sister, I said. She lived with us for a few months after you disappeared. She said she was grieving too. Briggs slid another photo forward. A blurry snapshot of a woman at a bank counter, signing documents. The timestamp was 1994. The signature on the form matched the forged one. No, that couldn't be right. Joyce wasn't cruel. She wasn't selfish. She struggled with money. Yes, job changes, debt, the endless cycle of trying to catch up. But she wouldn't. She couldn't. Emily closed her eyes and whispered. I remember a woman brushing my hair, saying, "You're better off not knowing who you were." Her voice was soft. But her hands shook. I felt the room tilt beneath me. Because Joyce's hands always shook. A lifetime tremor. Unmistakable. Briggs's voice softened. We don't have proof yet. But we have direction. The room fell quiet, except for the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant rhythm of hospital carts moving down the hall. I looked at my daughter, my living, breathing daughter, sitting inches away from me, holding memories that fractured her every time she tried to speak them aloud. And something inside me solidified into something sharper than grief. Resolve. Determination. A promise I had failed to keep 31 years ago. Briggs gathered the documents. There's more we haven't recovered yet. Transport records from Utah. Payment logs tied to the guardianship. We believe someone accessed government benefits under Emily's identity. Medical coverage, living expenses, small amounts, but consistent. Financial betrayal layered on top of everything else. Someone profited from her disappearance. Someone built their life from her stolen one. Emily touched the edge of the table lightly, grounding herself. I want to help, she whispered. If I can remember, if I can give you more, you will, Briggs said gently. But only when you're ready. We're not rushing you. I looked at Emily. Her hands trembled slightly, but her spine straightened. She wasn't the frightened girl the world had tried to erase. She was something stronger. Someone forged in darkness, returning to reclaim what was taken. And I knew then, whoever orchestrated this, whoever falsified her identity, whoever pushed her into the shadows, would not stay hidden much longer. Because now, she had a voice. And I had a purpose. And together, we were coming. Detective Briggs arranged a meeting at the Portland Courthouse the following week. A meeting that wasn't quite a hearing and not quite an interrogation, but something in between. An administrative session, where evidence could be presented without full public scrutiny. A controlled environment, she called it. But I knew what it really was. The beginning of exposure. The moment the truth stops whispering in the dark and begins speaking in full daylight. Emily insisted on coming. I didn't want her to. Not yet. But she looked at me with a steadiness I hadn't seen since she was a teenager. I've been silent my whole life, she said. Not today. The courthouse was an old sandstone building overlooking the river. The kind with tall, arched windows and staircases that echoed every footstep. Inside, everything smelled faintly of floor polish, and paper government buildings always do. Briggs led us to a room with a long oak table and a row of chairs, set up like a half-circle facing the front. 2 assistant prosecutors were already there. A forensic analyst, a social worker, a representative from the Financial Crimes Division, and 1 seat empty at the far end. For the person of interest, Briggs murmured. My pulse thudded painfully. I looked at Emily, her fingers twisted in the sleeve of her sweater, but her jaw was set. She had endured far worse than this room. She had survived years stolen, names stolen, a life rewritten beneath her. I sat beside her. So, our shoulders touched. The door opened behind us. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. The room shifted, the subtle hush people fall into when someone walks in who shouldn't be there. Joyce. I knew before I saw her. Before her perfume drifted forward. Floral. Too sweet. Always masking something sharper beneath. Before her nervous laugh cracked the air. Before her shoes clicked unevenly. The same irregular rhythm she'd had all her life. When she finally stepped into my view, the breath left my body. She looked older, but not fragile, just tired in a way that suggested she'd been running from something for years. Her hair was neatly curled, her blouse pressed, as if she'd dressed for church instead of a confrontation. But her eyes avoided mine. And avoiding is admission in its own way. Joyce Hale, one of the prosecutors said. Please take a seat. She hesitated a moment too long before sitting. Her hands shook. Always the tremor. Lifelong and unmistakable. But now I saw it differently, not as fragility, but as the vibration of secrets rattling against their own cages. Briggs began. We're here to review a series of documents related to the disappearance of Emily Hale in 1993 and the subsequent guardianship application filed in 1994 under the alias Rachel Moore. We have substantial evidence suggesting fraudulent activity. Joyce's chin lifted, false bravado settling like dust. I don't understand any of this. I tried to help the family. I suffered too. Briggs placed the photocopy of the forged signature on the table. The room felt suddenly smaller. Air tightening. Joyce froze. Her face flickered. Shock. Calculation. Fear. But she didn't reach for the document. She didn't need to. She recognized her own handwriting long before anyone asked her to. This signature, Briggs said calmly, was authenticated as yours. Joyce's voice wavered. That's not possible. We cross-referenced it. The forensic analyst cut in. With banking records, loan forms, and personal letters you wrote between 1990 and 2002. The match is conclusive. Emily's breath trembled beside me. "Why?" she whispered, barely audible. Joyce didn't answer. Not because she didn't hear, but because she did. And the truth was heavier than her denial. The analyst presented the next file. Financial records. Small deposits. Made regularly. Into accounts tied to the guardianship application. Insurance reimbursements. Housing allowances collected from 3 different states. You profited from her identity, the analyst said. For nearly a decade. Joyce's face collapsed into a tight grimace. I had debts. I had nothing. Your wife, God bless her, was grieving so hard she didn't see how much I sacrificed. I managed everything. The funeral. The bills. You stole her life. I snapped. The words tore out of me. Raw and sharper than I meant them to be. Joyce flinched but didn't turn toward me. One of the prosecutors spoke next. Miss Hale, can you explain your connection to the late Wallace Dunn? The name hit the room like a dropped weight. Joyce's eyes widened. I don't know who that is. But she answered too quickly. Her voice too high. Her breath too fast. Briggs placed a photograph on the table. A blurry image from 1994. Dunn standing outside a cabin. Joyce in the background behind him, partially hidden by a doorway. Emily's hand covered her mouth. I remember him, she whispered. He saw me once. Outside that cabin. He tried to ask if I was okay. The prosecutor leaned forward. Miss Hale, did you coordinate the transfer of Emily Hale under the name Rachel Moore? Did you accept financial benefits on her behalf? I did what I had to do. Joyce burst out suddenly, desperation cracking her composure. You don't understand. I was drowning. I needed a way out. She was already gone. And the forms those people they said someone needed to sign. Just someone. It didn't matter who. My vision blurred not from tears, but from anger so sharp it felt like heat. You kept her alive on paper, I said slowly, so she could stay dead to us. Joyce swallowed. I never thought she'd come back. Emily closed her eyes. And in that moment she looked both young and impossibly old. Someone who had lived too many lives and belonged fully to none. You were supposed to keep quiet, Joyce whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. You were supposed to disappear. The room froze. Everyone heard it. Everyone understood it. And Joyce realized too late what she'd admitted. One of the prosecutors nodded to the security officer, waiting by the door. Miss Hale, you are being taken into custody, pending further investigation, on charges including identity fraud, forged documentation, benefit theft, and obstruction of a missing person case. Joyce's chair screeched backward as she stood abruptly, hands shaking harder than ever. You can't do this, she pleaded, eyes darting between us. Daniel, tell them I was trying to help your family. I saved you, You didn't save us, I said. My voice came out low, steady, final. You buried us. All of us. Her expression crumpled, and for a brief moment, she looked small, like a person who had built an entire life on a lie so shaky that truth only needed one breath to knock it down. The officers approached. Joyce didn't fight. She didn't speak. She just let herself be led away. The click of her footsteps fading down the corridor like the closing of a long, dark chapter. Emily leaned into me then, not collapsing but resting, as though the weight she'd carried for 31 years had finally found a place to land. For the first time, I felt something like daylight break inside me. But justice wasn't finished. Not yet. The truth had stepped into the open, and the healing had only begun. They escorted Joyce out of the courthouse, but the silence she left behind didn't feel like relief. Not yet. It felt like the moment after a storm siren stops where the world stands still, waiting to learn the damage. Emily sat beside me, shoulders drawn inward, eyes fixed on the table where the documents still lay scattered. Papers that once told a story of a dead girl, now whispered a truth no one imagined. She had been alive, hidden in plain sight, her identity twisted into something profitable for someone else. Briggs waited until the room cleared before speaking. This isn't over, she said. The fraud charges alone will move fast, but the wider investigation, that will take time. Multiple states, multiple institutions. But today matters. Today is the first day Emily gets her name back. Her words landed with a weight I could almost feel against my chest. Her name. Something so simple for everyone else, but the one thing she'd been denied for more than half her life. Emily nodded but didn't speak. She kept touching the library card she'd brought, the one with her initials fading along the edge. It was the smallest object in the room, but somehow, it held more truth than all the paperwork combined. "Are you all right?" I asked softly. Her answer came slow. "I don't know how to be Emily yet." She looked at me then, eyes raw but steady. "But I know I'm not Rachel. And maybe that's enough for now." I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just squeezed her hand. After 31 years of silence, there were no perfect words, only presence. Over the next weeks, life moved in a new rhythm. One careful step, then another. The way you'd walk across ice that hasn't fully frozen. Emily stayed in a temporary housing unit near the hospital, part of a recovery program designed for people reclaiming their identities after long-term displacement. I visited every day. Sometimes we talked for hours. Sometimes we sat quietly listening to the river outside her window. Other times we didn't manage much more than breathing in the same room. But even that was a kind of healing. Justice, meanwhile, moved with the slow, grinding pace it always does. The fraud division gathered financial records. Cross-state investigators connected Emily's transfers between facilities. Forensic analysts verified dozens of forged documents. Each new discovery added another piece to a puzzle built on lies. One morning, about 3 weeks after the courthouse meeting, Briggs called me. "Daniel, the prosecutor's filing full charges. Identity fraud, benefit theft, obstruction of a missing person case, and there's more evidence suggests Joyce may have collaborated with an unknown third party in the early years." A cold ripple went through me. What kind of collaboration? We're not sure yet. But someone helped facilitate the transfers. Someone with access to youth intake systems in Idaho and Utah. The news didn't surprise me. The world that swallowed Emily for 3 decades wasn't built by one person, no matter how desperate or reckless. It took more hands than that. But, hearing confirmation, it still hurt. Later that same week, Emily asked if I'd go for a walk with her. "Not far," she said. "Just across the bridge." We walked in the cool Portland morning. Light rain coated the railings with a thin shimmer. Cars passed with the low hiss of wet tires. Emily kept both hands around a cup of coffee, holding it like a small anchor. "Do you remember the treehouse?" she asked suddenly. "I remember every nail," I said. She smiled, faint, but real. "I remember climbing up first because you were too scared to go before me. I didn't know what fear was yet. You carried it for both of us." I laughed softly, though it cracked halfway out. "You were braver than you knew." She stopped walking then, turning to face me fully. "Will you build another one? A treehouse?" The question caught me off guard. "Not exactly," she said. "Just something new. Something ours. I've lived in places I didn't choose my whole life. I want a place that feels like I'm allowed to exist." I nodded. "We'll build it. Whatever you need." Weeks later, after Emily's housing program found her a small apartment overlooking a community garden, I brought lumber, a toolbox, and an idea. Not a treehouse in the branches of a pine, but a small platform on her balcony, a reading nook sheltered with light cedar boards, and strung with warm bulbs she could turn on at night when memories hit too hard. The first time she sat there, wrapped in a blanket with a cup of tea, she whispered, "This feels like coming home." Justice continued its slow procession. Joyce pled guilty to several charges after evidence piled too high to deny. She tried to blame debt, loneliness, desperation. But desperation doesn't explain forging signatures or collecting money meant for a missing girl's care. Desperation doesn't erase 3 decades of silence. At sentencing, I sat behind Emily, my hand on her shoulder. Joyce didn't look at us. Not once. The judge spoke clearly, calmly revoking her access to any inheritance, ordering restitution, issuing a multi-year sentence. When the gavel fell, Emily let out a long breath, one that sounded like something leaving her body for the first time in 31 years. Outside the courthouse, she leaned into me, not collapsing, just resting. "I thought justice would feel like victory," she said quietly. "But it feels more like breathing again." I understood. Justice rarely arrives with fireworks. It arrives in opening space where grief can soften, space where truth can finally live, space where a person can reclaim the name stolen from them. In early spring, when cherry blossoms began to scatter across Portland sidewalks, Emily invited me to her apartment for brunch. She'd been baking not perfectly, not neatly, but with enthusiasm the way she did as a kid. "Cinnamon rolls," she said, smiling shyly. "They're not as good as Mom's." I tasted one. It didn't matter how they were meant to taste. What mattered was that we were here, two people who had lost more than most families lose in a lifetime, sitting across from each other, reclaiming something neither of us ever expected to touch again. After we ate, she looked at me with a quiet certainty. "I want to help people," she said. "People who went through what I did. Social work. Advocacy. Something that turns all this pain into something useful." "You already have," I told her. "You came back." That alone is more than I ever dared to hope. As evening settled in, Portland's lights reflected across the river, and for the first time in decades, I felt a future forming, a fragile one. Yes, but real. And now, if you're still with me, I want to ask you something. Tell me, would you forgive them, or would you choose justice? Subscribe for the next true Canadian family story, and tell me the city you're listening from. I'd like to know where this story has reached.